All right, let's look at adding an app settings.json file to our application. Now this takes the place of our app.config or web.config, and it really is the basic level of configuration. What I mean by that is .NET Core has the ability to stack these different configuration files on top of each other and have an order of precedence. And so you can put something in the app settings.json file and then have it overwritten or override those settings with something higher up the stack. For example, you can go all the way up to Key Vault in Azure. And the reason we have this stacking ability is because then you can work on something locally and have your local settings, maybe a local database connection string, those kind of things. But then as you take it to production, it doesn't take your local settings. Those get overridden by something in Azure Key Vault, which is secure and encrypted and not visible to anybody. So it's kind of locked down and it overwrites at runtime what your user experiences. So it's a very good system. It's a very easy system to put in place and kind of stack these on top of each other and become more and more secure, more and more team friendly, and all the rest. We're going to start at the basic level and just do app settings.json. This is for a place for information that does not have a password, is not secure. This is just for simple settings. For example, like I said, a local database connection string where you're not using a password, you're using your local credentials or something of that nature. So how do we go about doing that? Because it's not baked in right away. This is where the extensibility of .NET Core comes in. We're going to have to add whatever configuration provider we want. In this case, I want JSON. I much prefer JSON as a format over XML. So I can right-click on my dependencies, say Manage NuGet Packages, and this looks very similar to what you've seen before. We can go to Browse, and we're going to look for the extensions.configuration.json. And the second one actually in the list, it has 28 million downloads, and it's from Microsoft. That's the one you want. Its product URL is asp.net, and it's microsoft.extensions.configuration.json. JSON library, and a few other things. So if we look in here, if we look at NuGet package, notice underneath it, it has a few things. For example, inside of here, we can keep expanding and see what it's based upon. The reason it brings so many things in is because it's really these small little pieces that they form into one larger whole. So it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because now we can just replace one little piece instead of the entire package. Okay, so there's our NuGet package that's installed. We can close this out, and now we can add an app settings.json file. And you don't have to call it that. You can call it something totally different. But app settings.json is a pretty standard naming convention, so we're going to do that. So right-click on Console UI, add a new item, and we're going to search for just JSON. And there's a whole bunch of different options. We'll just select the JSON file, and we will name this app settings.json. So app settings.json, all lowercase, and there we go. There's our app settings.json, which is just an empty file, essentially. This is where we can actually put any configuration you want, and it really is flexible. Now, there is one, I don't want to say standard section because that's not the right word, but it's one semi-expected section, and that is the connection strings. So inside quotes, and then open your curly braces, and then inside here, let's just create a connection string. Let's call it default, and then a colon, and then inside here we can put whatever connection string you want. So this is my test connection string. Is that a connection string? No, it's not. That's just going to demonstrate we can put a connection string in here. We're not going to wire up to an actual database. This is just a demonstration of we can call it by this name and get this value. And that's what you will do. You will put whatever connection string to your database here, and then you'll call it based upon whatever name you've given it for this connection string's name. Okay? Just a key value pair. So let's go to our program.cs. Let's actually save that. We'll go over here, and now we have to bring in that configuration. This is a little bit more than we're used to, and this is kind of where console becomes a little bit of a second-class citizen. Not as much, but a little bit. So the .NET Core really revolves around the idea of the web frameworks. That's where it really shines, and it brings in things like dependency injection and all the rest by default. With this, we have to bring it in a little more manual process. It's not in the template, and so we have to bring it in ourselves. So we're not going to bring full dependency injection in, but what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a couple of, one interface. So we're going to make it public, actually. It has to be static because we're in a JSON. And then we're going to add a couple of optional things here. In fact, we're going to start with the optional, hit colon, and say, yes, this is optional, meaning we're not requiring you to have an app settings.json. The reason for this is because if we do have that stacking system, we might not even commit our app settings.json file to the repository because that has our personal stuff in it. But that's okay because we'll be stacking those different items like the Azure Key Vault. And so maybe it doesn't find it here, but that's okay because we got it in Key Vault. So optional equals true allows us to say, if you don't find a file, don't blow up. Don't worry about it. That's used for something else. Ignore it. Okay. So that's optional equals true. And then, or colon true, and then reload on change. Hit the colon there. And you don't have to do this. You could just type these out because there is an extension method that puts these in this order, but that's okay. You can also specify that way. If you want to add more settings, you can do so. So the reload on change equals true. The other thing specifying this does is it allows us to see what true and true means. Okay, so we see that it's optional. And we see that we're going to reload on change, which reload on change does exactly what we think it does. It's going to reload our application or reload the file whenever it changes. It's going to watch that file. If it changes, it's going to pull in those new settings. Okay, so now I've wired up this builder, which is a iConfiguration builder. So it's going to build a configuration. So it's wired up, and now what we can do is actually build our configuration. So we can say configuration, which is this variable right up here. Okay, I say configuration equals builder dot. Go ahead and build that. Okay, so it's going to take this configuration information, the setup, and actually build a configuration we're going to store. And now we can use this configuration anywhere. How can we use it? Well, let's come down below our first two console write lines, and let's come down here and say another console write line. And actually I'm going to put in a variable first. So let's say string, let's call it connection string equals, let's get that configuration information for the connection string. Configuration, which is the variable right up the top, configuration dot, we have a whole bunch of options. The one that's going to be the most common probably is maybe get section. So get a subsection with a specified key. But we're going to get connection string, which really is just shorthand for get section connection strings. Okay, and passing in the name type. So this is a little bit of shorthand for connection strings. And so we're going to open up the parens for that. And we're going to type in the name default, because that's the name of the connection string. That's the name we gave the connection string. Now to prove that, let's just take this variable and let's actually do our string interpolation and say connection string colon space, that connection string, and close out our quotes. So we're going to make sure we know that's a connection string, since it really isn't a connection string. It's just a random piece of text. Let's run this. There we go. Connection string is blank. Awesome. We broke something. What did we do? Well, a couple things we didn't do. So let's talk through what we're missing here. First thing is we need to make sure that, and this may be the only thing, actually, we have properties on app settings.json. We're currently not copying to output. Let's copy if it's newer. Let's run this. Yep, that was it. So connection string, this is my test connection string. Okay, so it pulled from that file our connection string. Now notice I didn't give it a path. I just said app settings.json. That's because when I do this, when I go to properties here and say copy to output directory, it's just put in the same place as my DLL. So if we go and look at this, let's go open folder in File Explorer, go to bin, debug, net22, we'll see app settings.json is right there. Okay, so it's all it's doing is copying that folder. Therefore, they're in the same location. Okay, but that's how you read from the connection strings, at least. And that's the most common thing you'll use a app settings for, but there's definitely other things as well. So what if you wanted to add something else? Well, if you are familiar with the JSON notation, essentially you have to put commas between these items. So let's create something else. Let's create a new section called demos. And then in here, I'm going to just give it a value straight up. So this is a demo. And then, well, you know what? Demos doesn't make sense if you have it plural. So let's go ahead and make this one the section with curly braces. Kind of formatting wrong there for a minute. So inside here, we'll say demo 1. And we'll say this is demo 1, comma, demo 2. This is demo 2. Okay. And then down below here, we'll say other info. This is more information. Okay, so now we've got a few more pieces of configuration. You kind of see how this is being laid out. So if you're not familiar with JSON, the curly braces identify sections. Okay, so it's identifying this is a section right down here. Everything in here lives inside these main curly braces. Then you have properties, like this is a property with individual values. Or you can have properties that have their own section. Okay, so in this case, this one has its own section with 2 items. And then it has properties and values, just key value pairs. But then again, you could nest it even further if you wanted to. You can get pretty crazy with this. But for the simple view, this is how a JSON file will lay out. So let's now read from this file. Now, there's a few ways you can do it, including, I'm not going to cover it here, but it'll be covered in a future section possibly, but you can actually read this into a model that matches this layout. Okay, so you can have a model with nested models and all the rest. Or what you can do is a simple way. Let's read first from the other info. That's pretty simple. So let's read other info. So let's go string other info equals configuration dot get section. And it's called other info. Other info dot value. Okay, so it's going to read the value of other info, and we'll just do okay. So that's the appsettings.json file and how to use it inside of your console application to get information out of that file.